Hey guys, Taylor here. So we're starting day 2 of building a website from scratch. Today we're just going to go over the very basics of CSS, kind of learn how to make our HTML look pretty. That's really all it is. So we're going to go through some of the syntax of CSS and kind of how it works, just the very basics of it, and we're going to make that's ridiculous.biz just look a little bit better than it does now. And feel free to play around with it. I'm keeping it very simple, but I'd encourage you to just delve into it a little bit and see if you can make it prettier.
Alright, day 2, adding CSS to make our HTML pretty. So here's we got that's ridiculous.com, or supposed to be that's ridiculous.biz rather. Alright, so today we're going to be adding CSS, and CSS is fundamentally, the basics are very simple. It can get very complex just because there's such a big language, so much syntax and stuff. But I'm just going to show you the basics. We'll keep it really simple, and you'll be up and running in no time. So the way CSS works is we put all our CSS inside a tag called a style tag. So inside your HTML, go ahead and create another tag called style. And this is where all our CSS goes. So the way that CSS works is we reference a particular element. For example, we'll say this form, and the way we want the form to look is like, we'll say the width 500 pixels. So what we're saying here is, here's the element we're going to reference, this form. It's this that we're now referencing. We're going to say we're going to make you 500 pixels wide, and the font for this, the syntax is we have a property here in green, then we have a colon, and then we have value here in pink, and then we end it with a semicolon. So same thing. We'll say, just so we can see the border, we'll say border 1 pixel solid CCC, and that's the color. We could also just say gray if you want. So border 1 pixel solid gray, and we'll go ahead and look at what that looks like now. So there's our form, and you can see how it changed the way the form looks. Now we're still not crazy about it, so we'll give it some padding. We'll give it a height of 200 pixels, and we'll also center it. There's a little trick where you say margin 0. That centers the form. Alright, so there we go. Now we've centered our form in the middle of our page. We can give it a background too. We'll just say background. It's just kind of a gray color there. This is a hexadecimal color, and you can look those up on Google and just see various colors that turn into hex colors. So there we go. Now we have a gray form. So feel free to play around with this. Again, the syntax is really simple. We have a reference. We open a bracket, close the bracket, and everything inside of those brackets is the CSS that is styled. So it's that simple. So that's when we want to reference an element. But let's say we have more than one form, or let's say, for example, that we're wanting to style a div tag. So we can't do this, or we can, but then that style will be applied to all the div tags. So this is where we introduce this idea of what we call HTML IDs, or classes. First we're going to use an ID. We're just going to say this is website name, and now we're giving this an ID, and now in the CSS we're going to reference it by using a hashtag. That's how you reference IDs. Hashtag the ID name, open brackets, again close brackets, and everything inside of here is going to be applied to this element. So we'll say what sort of, we'll just say color green. We'll make the font size big, 48 pixels. We'll center it. Center, and we'll give it a margin. Let's say the margin top 20 pixels, and also margin bottom 20 pixels. Alright, now let's take a look at what that looks like. Boom. So there we go. Now our website name is big and green and in the center there. Our page still doesn't look very good, so we're going to do a few more things just to make it look nice. Let's say we'll reference the body. Now, we only have one body tag, and we'll probably ever only have one body tag, so we don't really need to. Why don't we just give the body a background color of a white gray is what that turns out to be. And I'm going to change this form name to give, since we have the background color, this color, I'm just going to change the form to be white, and that white happens to be FFF. So there we go. That I think might look a little better. It doesn't look great, but you can even do something like for the form, say border radius 3 pixels. Yep, so it gives it a little border radius, say 5 pixels. So there we go, we just curved the edges of the form. So that's starting to look a little bit nicer, but just remember this, so we have this ID so that we can reference that particular element and only that element. And instead of having this form, we're going to also do the same thing with the form. We'll say ID equals, let's see what, we'll just call it upload form. And so rather than referencing a form, we're going to reference the ID. That way, if we put another form on that page, it'll look different. You can see it doesn't change anything, but if we had two forms, it would now only reference this form. Now, a similar concept is not IDs, but what we call classes, and they work very similar to the way the IDs work, except generally you only have one ID. Well, you can only have one ID on one element. So an element has to have a unique ID, but with classes, we could do something like we could say top 20. So we could define a class, give that a class, and then instead of using a hashtag for the ID, we use a dot for the class. We'll say top 20, and what this is going to be is just a style that says margin top 20 pixels. And now you can see that this input, the submit input, we said we're going to give you a margin on the top of 20 pixels, so we'll be able to see here's our. So now it goes down, and we can do other stuff. We'll give it another class and say. We'll just say blue border, for example, and we'll say define another class here, blue border, 1 pixel, solid blue, and now you can see that the border is blue. So it's as simple as that. We'll just add, just so you get the idea, really stuck in your head. We'll add one more, centered. So dot centered. Alright, now it should center it. Well, the issue here is that will center, but we need to give it, say, display block here. There we go. So now we've centered our element. So that's the very basics of CSS. Just to add a little bit more, we'll say input. We want to make the input. So notice how the input's all showing up right next to each other. We'll make it block, and then so it changes to more of a block element rather than an inline element. So it breaks the line. It's a new line. And the other thing we can do is, so let's say, see how we're referencing the input, but all the input that we're referencing is inside this upload form. So rather than just referencing all the input on the page, we can actually reference the ID and then inside of the ID the input. So that way it just is more specific, so that if we have other input on the page, this style display block is not applied. So you can see that it stays the same here. We'll do a similar thing with the labels. So we want to be able to see the labels. We'll just say font weight bold, display block, just to make them stand out a little bit more, and then we'll say margin top 20 pixels just to space things out a little bit. And there we go. So we have a very basic kind of form on a web page that looks nicer than it did before. So it doesn't look great. So I'd encourage you to kind of play around with this, with the HTML, add some CSS to your HTML tags, and there's some great references online. You can check out W3C Schools. I got the link in the tutorial on the devcorner.com to that. And one of the things about CSS is it does take some time to learn, and you'll see there's a lot of kind of little things that you need to know that that aren't intuitively obvious. The basic syntax is really simple, but there's lots of things that you'll learn along the way. I mean, there's no way to know off the top of your head how to define all the properties. You know, color, font size, margin, text align, height, width, border padding. I mean, there's hundreds of these. There really is. So just find a good reference guide and play around with it. And it really just takes a lot of practice and a lot of programming. But once you get going, it's really fun. And especially if you're design oriented, you can really build some cool stuff. So that's all for today. Thanks, and bye for now.